The night before her 18th birthday, Clara Bennett heard her father's boots pacing outside her room. Sharp, uneven thuds that spoke of whiskey and worry. She lay awake, pretending to sleep, clutching the edge of her quilt as the wind howled against their broken shutters. Their ranch, once proud and bustling, had become a graveyard of dying cattle and unpaid debts. But she had no idea how deep her father's desperation had cut, until morning came. At dawn, the rattle of horses jolted her awake. She stepped outside, her thin nightdress fluttering in the chill, and froze. 3 Apache riders waited near the corral, their faces painted, their eyes sharp as flint. Her father, Henry Bennett, stood beside them, hat in hand, his face pale and wet with sweat. "Pa," she whispered. "What's going on?" He couldn't meet her eyes. The eldest Apache, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted. His gaze locked onto hers with an unreadable calm, and she felt her knees weaken. There was something both regal and terrifying about him, the weight of command in his silence. "This is Taza, king of the Chiricahua," her father muttered. He's taking you north. In exchange, he's clearing my debt." The words didn't make sense. Clara laughed, a small, breathless sound of disbelief. "You're joking." He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a small leather satchel, her mother's locket inside, a few coins, and a hairbrush. Her hands shook as she pushed it back against his chest. "You're selling me?" she cried. "To them?" Her father's jaw tightened. "It's that or lose everything, Clara. You'll be treated well." He gave his word. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to beg him to take it back, but when she looked into Taza's eyes, something froze inside her. They were not cruel, not mocking, just steady and old, like he'd seen 1,000 tragedies before this one. Without a word, he gestured for his men to mount. One of them tied Clara's wrists with a strip of soft leather. She didn't fight. It wouldn't have mattered. Her father turned away, unable to watch as she was lifted onto a horse. "Pa!" she shouted. "Please, don't let them take me." But the only answer was the creak of the saddle and the slow rhythm of hooves against the dust. As the ranch faded behind her, Clara's heart broke. Not just for the life she was losing, but for the man her father had become. She wanted to hate him, but part of her knew desperation when she saw it. He had chosen survival over love. The journey north was brutal. The desert stretched endlessly, shimmering beneath the cruel sun. The Apaches rode silently, wasting no breath on words. Clara's lips cracked from thirst, her skin burned, her arms ached from the bonds. And always ahead of her rode Taza, the man who now claimed ownership of her fate. At night, they stopped by the river. She sat apart, staring into the dark, trembling. Taza approached once, offering her a wooden bowl of water. When she refused, he crouched beside her, his voice low and deep. "You will die if you do not drink," he said in accented English. "Maybe I want to," she muttered. His gaze lingered on her, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, sadness perhaps, or regret. Then he stood and walked away, leaving her with the bowl. That night, under a sky crowded with stars, Clara cried quietly until the exhaustion stole her strength. She thought of her mother's grave, the scent of lavender soap, the laughter of her childhood before everything had gone to dust. And as dawn bled over the horizon, she realized something cold and terrible. There was no going back. Her life, her name, her freedom, belonged to the Apache king now. But even as fear coiled in her stomach, a strange thought whispered through her mind, soft as desert wind. If he wanted to hurt me, he already would have. She didn't know why that thought comforted her. She didn't know it yet, but that small seed of curiosity, of fragile trust, would one day grow into the very thing that would save her heart. The journey into Apache territory carved the fear out of Clara, one silent mile at a time. For 3 days, the riders moved like ghosts across the desert. No talk, no wasted motion, no sign of fatigue. The land itself seemed to obey them, wind bowing through dry grass, the sun spilling gold over endless stone. Clara's wrists were freed the second day, but she still felt the invisible weight of captivity. The man at the head of the column, Taza, the one her father had called the Apache king, rode a black stallion with the ease of someone born in the saddle. His long hair flowed like a dark banner in the wind, and though he never looked back, she always felt his awareness, keen, constant, protective, or perhaps possessive. She couldn't tell. By the fourth evening, they reached a hidden valley encircled by red cliffs. Smoke curled lazily from fires, and the scent of roasting corn and venison filled the air. Children ran barefoot among the lodges, laughing freely, while women looked up with cautious eyes at the white-skinned stranger among them. Clara expected shouts or stones, but none came. Only silence and curiosity. Taza dismounted, motioning for her to follow. His voice carried quiet command as he spoke to his people in Apache. The crowd parted for him. To her surprise, a young woman approached, barefoot, smiling, her hair tied with blue beads. She took Clara's hand gently and guided her toward a large lodge draped in buffalo hide. "Taza says you stay here," the woman said in halting English. "I am Nalan. I bring you food." Clara glanced around, bewildered. "He's not keeping me tied?" Nalan shook her head with a small laugh. "You are guest, not slave." The word guest lodged somewhere in Clara's chest. She had expected chains, cruelty, maybe even worse, but this was different. The lodge was clean and warm. A fur blanket had been laid out for her. Someone had even left a carved wooden cup of water beside her bed. That night, exhaustion finally claimed her. When she woke, the sun was already up, and through the open flap of the lodge, she saw Taza standing alone near the edge of camp, speaking to an elder. His posture was regal but unassuming. There was power in him, but not arrogance. Curiosity overcame fear. She stepped outside. A few heads turned, but no one stopped her. The children whispered white fire and darted away, giggling. She watched Taza for a long while until he noticed her. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither understood. "You sleep well?" he asked, his English slow but clear. "Yes," she answered cautiously. Why are you being kind to me?" He seemed to think before speaking. "Your father sold you, but I do not buy pain." His words struck her like a stone to the heart. He turned away before she could reply, giving orders to the men nearby. Days passed in uneasy peace. Clara began to see how the tribe lived, how they worked together, how laughter came easily even in hardship. She watched women grind corn, men craft arrows, and children chase lizards beneath the blazing sun. Slowly she learned their rhythm, their silence, their respect for the land. At first, Taza was a distant shadow, always present, never near. Then small things began to shift. A blanket laid quietly at her side when the nights turned cold. A water skin refilled without asking. A feather placed at the entrance of her lodge after she helped an injured child. One evening she found herself near the central fire, surrounded by music and drum beats that echoed through her chest. Taza stood at the edge of the light watching her, not as a possession but as a puzzle. When their eyes met again, something inside her softened. He approached, his expression unreadable. "You are afraid of me?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then whispered, "I was. Maybe I still am." He nodded once. "Good, fear keeps you alive, but not all fear is bad." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and vanished into the shadows. That night, as she lay under the woven blanket he had given her, she thought about his words, about the quiet power in his restraint, the sadness behind his eyes. And for the first time since she'd been sold, Clara realized she wasn't trembling anymore. The man she feared most might be the only one who had never truly meant her harm. By the time the moon had passed its full face and begun to wane, Clara had stopped counting the days since her arrival in Taza's camp. The first weeks had been steeped in confusion and fear, but now a strange rhythm had taken root in her life. Every dawn began the same way. The smell of wood smoke, the sound of women grinding corn, and the echo of distant laughter that always made her ache for something she couldn't name. Taza remained a mystery. He moved among his people like the wind, quiet, commanding, impossible to grasp. The tribe called him Nantan, meaning leader, but there was something deeper in their tone, something like reverence. Wherever he walked, people made way, not out of fear but respect. Clara often watched him from afar, wondering what kind of man could rule a people with so few words. One morning, as the women gathered by the stream to wash clothes, Nalan, her only real friend, motioned Clara to join. "You sit too much," Nalan teased, handing her a bundle of damp linen. "Help. Learn." Clara knelt awkwardly, her pale hands clumsy beside the dark, sure fingers of the Apache women. Laughter rippled when she splashed too hard or tangled a sleeve, but it wasn't cruel laughter. It was warm, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She smiled despite herself. Later, as they worked, Nalan pointed to a nearby boy and said something in Apache. "Taza's nephew," she explained. "He watch you. He say white woman brave," Clara blinked. "He said that?" Nalan nodded, grinning. "Taza tell him you are under his protection. That mean no one touch you, not even look wrong." The thought sent heat rushing to Clara's cheeks. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Protection, not ownership. There was a difference, a subtle, dangerous one. That evening, she found herself lingering near the fire where Taza sat with the elders. His deep voice spoke in measured tones, rhythmic like poetry. The firelight carved his face in copper and gold. When the meeting ended, he noticed her watching and approached. "You understand our words yet?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Only pieces. I want to learn." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps. "Then you will learn from Nalan. And from me." He knelt and drew a symbol in the dirt. A curved line like a snake. "This is Sicha," he said. "River." Clara repeated the word, struggling with the rhythm. He corrected her gently, his voice low and patient. "No, from here." He touched his chest. "Feel it, not just speak it." For the next hour, under the silver wash of the moon, he taught her simple words: fire, sky, heart. She stumbled through them, laughing at her mistakes while his stoic face softened by degrees. By the end, they were smiling at each other like two people who had forgotten they were supposed to be enemies. As she returned to her lodge, Nalan whispered teasingly, "He teaches no one himself." "You are lucky." Clara tried to hide her blush, but it was too late. The thought stayed with her all night. Over the following weeks, their lessons continued. Taza showed her how to read tracks in the sand, how to tell time by shadows, how to listen to silence as if it spoke. "The land has a voice," he told her one twilight. "If you are still enough, it tells you what it needs." Clara began to understand that his power didn't come from violence but from patience, from the quiet certainty that he belonged to the earth and it to him. She saw the tenderness in the way he spoke to elders, the gentleness with which he brushed a child's hair from their face. One afternoon, she brought him a small carving she'd made from a piece of driftwood, an awkward attempt at an eagle. He turned it in his hands, smiling faintly. "You make this?" "Yes," she said nervously. "To thank you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You do not owe me thanks, Whitefire." "Whitefire?" she echoed. He nodded. "Your spirit burns bright even when afraid. That is what I call you now." Something in his tone made her heart thrum. The name was not mockery, it was honor. And from that moment, Clara felt something shift inside her. The Apache camp no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place where her name, Whitefire, meant something powerful, something alive. And every night, when Taza's low voice drifted across the camp, she found herself listening not out of fear but longing. She didn't yet call it love, but it was already beginning to burn. The desert heat had been relentless that summer, and with it came sickness. A strange fever crept through the Apache camp, striking the young and the old alike. Clara noticed it first in the children, pale cheeks, glassy eyes shivering under thin blankets. The women tried to comfort them with herbs and prayers, but even their skill seemed to falter against the invisible enemy. At first, Clara had stayed out of it, afraid of overstepping. She was still a stranger here, still the girl sold into a world she barely understood. But the sight of a small boy coughing violently by the fire broke something inside her. She remembered her mother teaching her about medicinal plants, about how willow bark could soothe pain, how lavender eased fever. Her hands shook as she approached the boy, murmuring words she wasn't sure he understood. "You're not afraid?" Nalan asked softly, appearing beside her. I am," Clara admitted, dipping the leaves into boiling water. "But he needs help more than I fear." Together, they worked through the day, moving from one fevered body to the next. Clara soaked cloths in cool water, applied poultices, and whispered encouragement when the children could barely hold their heads up. The tribe watched her closely, their initial wariness giving way to cautious respect. Even the elders nodded at her efforts, but when Taza himself fell ill, Clara's fear returned with a vengeance. He had ridden across the desert in the sun, checking on outlying bands, and now he lay in the center lodge, shivering and sweating, silent, but for the occasional low groan. The Apache warriors hovered at a respectful distance, unwilling to interfere with the king's illness. Clara stood at the doorway, heart hammering. Every story she had ever heard about captives in the hands of fierce warriors whispered at the edges of her mind. She had come here fearing Taza's wrath. Now she feared for his life. Summoning courage, she stepped forward. "Let me help him," she said, her voice steady despite the quiver inside. Taza's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with that unnerving calm. He did not speak, only inclined his head slightly. Nalin handed her a bundle of herbs and left silently. Clara knelt beside him, cool water on his lips, a cloth dampened in willow extract pressed to his brow. Hours passed. Sweat dripped from the king's hairline, and Clara's arms ached from holding him upright. At times, delirium made him mutter words in Apache she didn't understand. But she stayed, whispering comfort, tracing lines across his chest with her fingertips, feeling the rise and fall of his ragged breaths. At the edge of dawn, Taza stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at her. For the first time, Clara saw vulnerability there, a flicker beneath the stoic mask of the desert king. "You did not run," he whispered, voice raspy but steady. Clara swallowed, unsure how to respond. I couldn't," she admitted. He touched her hand lightly, and for a heartbeat she felt a warmth she hadn't expected. "The spirits test us," he said slowly. "They showed me your heart. You are not afraid of life, or of responsibility." A shiver ran down her spine. His words were more than praise, they were acknowledgement, a recognition she had not yet dared to hope for. The silence of the lodge became sacred. No one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and for once Clara felt part of something larger than herself. In the days that followed, the fever passed, leaving behind survivors who were grateful but exhausted. The tribe spoke of Clara's bravery in whispers, calling her a healer, a caretaker, a girl who had defied fear to save life itself. She began to feel the strange and unsettling pull of respect, trust, and even something closer, a connection to Taza that went beyond captor and captive. One evening, as she sat beside him while he recovered, Taza reached for her hand again. "You are brave, Whitefire, remember that. Courage is not absence of fear. It is what we do with it." Clara looked into his dark, unreadable eyes and realized she had begun to understand. Fear had brought her here. But courage, quiet and fierce, might be what kept her alive, and what would eventually make her heart follow. For the first time, she glimpsed the possibility that the man she had feared the most could one day be the one she would choose to love. The desert's silence is fragile like glass, and that summer it shattered. Word arrived from a scout that U.S. soldiers were approaching the Chiricahua lands. Clara overheard the whispers at the edge of the camp, men arguing in low, urgent tones, women and children holding their breaths. The soldiers, they said, wanted to enforce treaties that had long since been broken, to seize the Apache's lands and punish any who resisted. Fear surged in Clara. She had come to understand the rhythms of this land, to know its people, and now an outside force threatened everything she had begun to care for. For the first time, she truly understood Taza's life, a constant balance of trust and vigilance, power and patience. The tribe debated what to do. Send Clara away, hide her? But Taza stood firm. "She stays under my protection," he said, voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "No one touches her. Not the soldiers, not even the wind." Clara's heart clenched. Protection, not ownership. Not chains. She had never imagined the weight of someone's vow could feel so reassuring. Yet when the first soldiers appeared on the ridge, their rifles glinting in the sun, fear returned in a tangible wave. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, silent and precise. Taza directed them without shouting, pointing and gesturing. Clara ran alongside Nalin, helping hide the children and gather the elders, her hands trembling but her resolve hardening. The soldiers' horses thundered, sending clouds of dust into the valley. Clara could hear their commands, harsh and foreign, but she clutched the children to her chest and ignored the pounding in her own ears. Then came the clash. Arrows cut through the air, soldiers fired, and chaos erupted. Clara had never been in battle, and yet instinct drove her forward. She dragged the children behind rocks, tended to the wounded, and even tried to block a falling warrior from the soldier's path. Each time she risked her life, she felt a strange, intoxicating surge of purpose. And then she saw him, Taza, at the center of it all. His dark eyes were cold and precise, every movement deliberate. yet he carried the burden of leadership with an almost supernatural calm. A soldier lunged toward him, rifle raised, and before she could think, Clara shouted a warning. The soldier turned just in time to avoid the strike, but another came. Taza blocked the shot with his arm and pain flashed across his face. "No!" Clara screamed, running to him, heart hammering. Blood streaked across his dark tunic, and the fear she had once felt for him returned tenfold. But he waved her back with a hand, grimacing through the pain. Something fierce and unstoppable ignited in Clara. She seized a fallen weapon, joined the warriors, and pushed the soldiers back. Her fear became clarity, her panic a weapon of focus. She moved with a determination she hadn't known she possessed, saving not only Taza but the tribe that had welcomed her. When the soldiers finally retreated, dust and smoke curling in the heat, Clara dropped to her knees beside Taza. His wound was not fatal, but deep, and he smiled faintly despite the pain. "You fight well, Whitefire," he whispered, his voice a mixture of pain and admiration. Clara's chest ached, not from exertion, but from the realization of what she felt for him. The man she had feared, the king she had believed untouchable, had allowed her to stand beside him. She had saved his life, but in doing so she had given herself over to him in a way she could not undo. That night, the camp settled into uneasy peace. Fires burned, tending to wounds, drying sweat and soothing cries. Clara sat quietly, watching Taza move among his people. She understood now what it meant to belong somewhere, not because of blood or chains, but because someone trusted you enough to let you choose to stay. And as the wind whispered across the cliffs, carrying the scent of smoke and sage, Clara felt a stirring in her heart. The war had come and gone, but the battle within her between fear and love was only just beginning. The desert dawn was quiet, almost sacred as Clara knelt by the stream, washing the dust and sweat from her arms. The events of the past weeks, Taza's injury, the soldiers' attack, the tribe's narrow escape, had left her body weary, but her mind restless. She had discovered something in herself she hadn't known existed: courage. But along with courage came another, far more complicated feeling, an unbidden ache whenever Taza's dark eyes fell on her. That morning, Taza approached, moving with the silent authority she had learned to recognize. He did not call her name, did not gesture. He simply stopped beside her and watched her work. She felt his gaze like the weight of the sun, warm, insistent, inescapable. "You are quiet today," he said softly, his voice low and deliberate. "I am thinking," she replied cautiously, "about the soldiers, about the tribe, about you." She immediately regretted saying it aloud, but his gaze did not falter. Taza's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, and he sat down beside her on the riverbank. For a long moment, neither spoke. The water lapped gently against stones. The wind carried the scent of sage, and the desert held its breath. Finally, he spoke, voice quiet and strained. "I did not think I could trust a white woman. Not after my brother." His words were almost a whisper, but they cut through her more sharply than any shout could. "He was killed by those we trusted, by treaties that were lies. Since then, I have vowed never to love one of your people, never to open my heart to betrayal again." Clara's hands froze in the water. She had known fear and hatred had shaped his past, but hearing it aloud, seeing the raw edge of his grief, made something ache inside her. "And yet," he continued, his eyes dark and steady, fixed on hers, "you came into my life. You risked yourself for my people, for me. You did not run when it would have been easier. You stayed, and you showed me something I thought I had lost forever." Her breath caught. She could see it now, the vulnerability hidden behind the Desert King's stoic face. He was not just a leader, not just a warrior. He was a man scarred by loss, and somehow inexplicably, she had found a place in the fortress of his heart. "Taza, she began, but words failed her. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing her cheek, and for the first time Clara felt the warmth of his touch, not as fear, but as welcome. "I have tried to resist this feeling, this pull," he admitted, his voice barely audible, "but I cannot. You are no longer a stranger. You are not a captive. You are part of my world, my people, and I see now that I do not wish to lose you, ever." Clara's heart raced, and for the first time in her life she did not step back from a man's touch. The weight of fear she had carried since being sold melted under the truth in his eyes. He was confessing something deeper than words: trust, longing, and the fragile stirrings of love. "I never imagined that fear could lead me here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I think I care for you, Taza." His lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, and his hand lingered on her cheek. "And I for you, Whitefire. Not because you were given to me, but because you chose to stand with me, to face life and danger without running. You have earned my heart not through chains, but through courage and spirit." A quiet peace settled over them, the desert around them seeming to recognize it. For the first time, Clara saw Taza not as the feared king of the Chiricahua, but as a man capable of love, capable of vulnerability, capable of being changed by her presence. In that moment, as the sun rose behind the red cliffs, they sat together by the river, two hearts scarred by life, learning to trust, learning to hope. Fear had brought her to him, but love, real, unshakable love, was beginning to bloom. The desert's peace was fragile, as Clara had learned, and one morning that fragile calm shattered. A rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind him like a warning. As he drew closer, her heart sank. The familiar figure of her father, Henry Bennett, clad in the pale, stiff clothes of the settlers, flanked by U.S. soldiers. Clara's chest tightened. After everything, the journey, the lessons, the battles, the quiet trust she had begun to feel, her father had come to claim her once more. And this time he brought men with weapons. She ran to Taza, breathless, heart pounding. "He's here. He wants to take me back," she said, voice trembling. Taza stood at the edge of the camp, his presence commanding even in the face of threat. His dark eyes met hers, calm and measured. But Clara felt the tension in his shoulders. The barely restrained force coiled in his stance. "He will not take you," Taza said, his voice low but firm. "You are under my protection. No one touches you." But Henry Bennett's words carried the weight of desperation and entitlement. "Clara, you come with me. You're my daughter. You belong with your people, not these savages." Clara's heart ached with conflicting emotions. Anger at his betrayal, grief for the father she had once trusted, and fear of the consequences if she refused. Yet the memory of the camp, of Taza's unwavering restraint, of the children and elders she had helped save, steeled her resolve. She would not go. The soldiers, rigid and armed, advanced, shouting commands. Taza raised his hand, signaling the warriors, who melted into the shadows, arrows and spears ready. Clara's pulse quickened as she watched the desert transform into a battlefield once more. But this time, it was different. Clara was not a passive observer. She moved swiftly, guiding children behind rocks, aiding wounded warriors, and warning of approaching soldiers. The wind carried the clash of steel and the cries of men, but Clara's fear had morphed into purpose. Every decision she made could save lives. Taza's life, her own, the life of the tribe that had become her home. Then she saw Taza, at the center of it all, intercepting a soldier aiming directly at him. His arm jerked back as a rifle discharged, and he was struck. Pain flashed across his face, darkening the determined calm she'd come to trust. Her stomach dropped. "No," she screamed, charging forward. Her hand shook as she grabbed a fallen spear, joining the warriors. Fear had once been her prison. Now it fueled her courage. She fought beside the Apache, moving with the precision and instinct she had gained over months of survival. She pushed back the soldiers, saving Taza, saving the tribe. Finally, the soldiers retreated, leaving a cloud of dust and silence behind. Clara collapsed beside Taza, trembling and covered in sweat and blood, her hands pressed to his wound. He looked at her, pain etched on his face, but a faint smile touched his lips. "You fight well, Whitefire," he whispered, voice strained but warm. Clara's chest heaved. Relief, fear, and something far deeper, something electric, coursed through her. The man she had once feared, the king who had claimed her as his own, had allowed her to stand beside him in battle. And in doing so, he had made her heart impossible to control. That night, under the wide expanse of stars, the camp healed from the day's turmoil. Fires burned, tending to the wounded, and songs rose softly in gratitude for survival. Clara sat quietly, watching Taza move among his people with measured care, realizing that her place was no longer defined by chains or fear, but by choice. Her father's betrayal had brought danger, but it had also crystallized a truth Clara could no longer deny. She belonged here, in this world of dust and fire, under the protection and the gaze of a man who was no longer just her captor, He had become her anchor, her heart, and her choice. And in the quiet of the desert night, Clara understood the stakes of love. It required courage, and sometimes it demanded a battle to protect what mattered most. The desert had grown quiet in the days after the battle. Smoke rose lazily from the evening fires, carrying the scent of roasted venison and sage. And the Apache camp moved with a rhythm Clara had come to know like her own heartbeat. Children laughed freely, warriors trained under the waning sun, and the elders offered prayers of gratitude for survival. Yet beneath this calm, Clara sensed a tension she could not ignore. Her father had been captured during the soldiers' retreat, and now the question of justice hung in the air. The tribe demanded vengeance. Some argued that Henry Bennett had endangered their people, that the bloodshed should not go unpunished. Others, including Taza, insisted that mercy could be stronger than retaliation. Clara's heart ached at the thought. Her father had betrayed her, yes, but he was still the man who had given her life. Yet she could not deny the fear, the panic, the greed that had brought him here. Taza, as always, moved with quiet authority. He had healed from his wound, his dark eyes sharp and commanding once more. When he approached Clara, she felt the weight of his gaze, not just as a king, but as a man who trusted her judgment. "What should we do with him?" she asked, voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "Blood is easy," Taza said, his tone grave. "Mercy is harder." Clara took a deep breath. Her father had sold her, yes, but he had also been desperate, weak, flawed. If the tribe killed him, it would cement fear and hatred in her heart forever. She stepped forward. "Let him go," she said firmly. "Let him leave." Mercy does not mean weakness. It means strength. Taza studied her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "As you wish." Her father was released, humbled, broken, and ashamed. He muttered his gratitude, but the words fell flat. There was no joy in this reunion. Only a recognition that the daughter he had tried to control was now her own person, forged in courage and fire. He left the desert quietly, knowing he could not reclaim what he had sold. As the dust settled, Clara felt herself straddling two worlds, the one she had been born into, pale and constrained, and the one she had chosen, vibrant and free, anchored by Taza and the people who had become her family. She walked among the lodges, helping with tasks, listening to the laughter of children and learning the subtle ways the tribe thrived on trust and respect. She had been afraid once, but now fear had transformed into belonging. That evening, Taza approached her as the sun dipped behind the red cliffs, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. He did not speak immediately, only stood beside her in silence, watching the camp. The desert wind carried the faint sound of drums, of life continuing undisturbed. "You are no longer a prisoner," he said finally, his voice low, deliberate. "Nor are you a stranger. You have chosen this life, chosen me." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her. Choice. She had never had it before. She had been sold, captured, forced, but now she had agency. She could decide where she belonged, with whom and how. "I have," she whispered, her hand brushing against his. "I belong here. With you. With them. This is my home." Taza's hand closed over hers, firm and grounding. For a moment they stood together, the wind tugging at their hair, the desert stretching endlessly around them. It was a fragile piece, a tenuous balance between two worlds, but it was real. That night, Clara lay under the stars, listening to the camp settle into quiet sleep. She thought of the world she had left behind, of her father, of the life she could have returned to, but it no longer called to her. Her heart was here, in the red canyons, with the man who had once terrified her but now held her trust, her respect, and perhaps her love. In the space between the two worlds, Clara discovered the power of choice, the strength of mercy, and the quiet, unstoppable pull of a heart that knew where it truly belonged. The dawn came soft over the desert cliffs, spilling golden light across the Apache camp. Clara sat on a rock, her hands resting in her lap, watching the way the wind lifted dust into swirling patterns. The world felt fragile, balanced between peace and the memory of violence, between the life she had been born into and the life she had chosen. Today, that balance would demand a decision. A white envoy arrived with the morning sun, riding hard and shouting formalities. They brought letters of safe passage, a promise of return to the world Clara had once known. They spoke of her family, of inheritance, of a future that included comfort, society, and security. Everything her father had sold her for once existed in their words, yet now, hearing them, the hollow weight of what she had been offered filled her chest. She no longer yearned for the world she had left behind. Taza approached silently, dark eyes watching her with the calm certainty she had come to trust. He did not speak at first, letting her face the choice alone. Yet she felt the weight of his gaze, as if the wind itself carried the question. Which world would she choose? She thought of the red cliffs, the fires at night, the laughter of children she had helped save, and the warriors who had fought beside her. She remembered his hand on hers, steady and grounding. The first time he had trusted her enough to let her help him during his illness. She remembered the battle, the blood, the fear that had transformed into courage, and she remembered the slow, impossible bloom of something she could no longer deny. Love. You have a choice, Taza said softly, his voice carrying over the still desert air. You may go with them, or you may stay. Clara's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. Freedom is not returning to a life that no longer fits me. Freedom is choosing where I belong. Taza's dark eyes softened, and a faint smile brushed his lips. Then your freedom is with me, he said. A sense of relief and certainty washed over her. She stepped forward, taking his hand in hers. The world of whitewashed halls, cold formality, and her father's faded promises no longer held sway over her heart. She belonged here, in the desert with Taza, and among a people who had become her family. The envoy waited, awkward and rigid in their formalities, but Clara did not look back. She had crossed a threshold from fear to courage, from captivity to choice, and now, the life that had been forced upon her was replaced by one she had claimed herself. That evening, the camp celebrated in quiet song. Fires burned, and children danced between shadows, carrying the warmth of survival and new beginnings. Clara moved among the people, her hand brushing Taza's as they walked together. She felt the steady beat of his heart beneath his chest, matching her own, and for the first time, she understood that love was not chains or fear. It was a bond forged in courage, trust, and choice. Clara reflected on her journey, the fear that had brought her here, the lessons learned in silence, the battles fought alongside a man she had once dreaded, and the vulnerability that had opened both their hearts. Every step, every decision had led to this moment. She no longer doubted herself or the place she had carved in this world. That night, she sat beside Taza under the endless stars, the desert stretching in all directions, infinite and wild. I chose this, she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. And I will never let you regret it, he replied, voice as steady as the earth beneath them. For the first time since being sold, Clara felt complete. Fear had guided her steps to the Apache king, but love, true, unyielding, and chosen, was what had claimed her heart. The desert had tested her, the spirits had watched, and she had emerged whole, not as a captive, but as a woman who had learned the strength of her own will and the power of a heart that dared to love. In the quiet, with the wind carrying the scent of sage and fire, Clara realized the truth. She had found a home, a family, and a love worth every fear, every battle, and every choice she had made. The dawn broke over the red cliffs like fire spilling across the desert, painting the world in gold and amber. Clara stood beside Taza at the center of the camp, her hands entwined with his, the weight of the past months settling into a quiet, steady peace. Today was not just another day, it was a beginning. She wore a dress of white buckskin braided with turquoise beads that caught the light like drops of water. Her hair, once wild and untamed, was woven with care, the strands falling over her shoulders in a pattern that mirrored the sacred designs of the tribe. The people of the camp had gathered around, elders and children alike, forming a circle of warmth and blessing. Clara felt the weight of every moment that had brought her here, the fear, the battles, the moments of courage, and the spark of trust that had grown into love. Taza stood tall beside her, his dark eyes reflecting the flames of the central fire. The scars on his chest, reminders of battles fought and brothers lost, did not diminish him. They marked the life he had survived, the strength he had earned. Now as he looked at Clara, there was no authority, no distance, only recognition and the unspoken promise of a shared future. The tribe sang, a low, haunting melody that rose and fell with the wind. Clara felt it vibrate through her bones, carrying the blessing of a people who had once been strangers but were now family. Taza's hand tightened around hers, and she saw in his gaze not possession, but partnership, an acknowledgement that they had found each other not through chains or fear, but through courage, respect, and love. When the elders began the sacred ritual, Taza whispered in her ear, "You were sold to me once, but today I win you by love." Clara's heart swelled. The words were not a claim, but a promise, the culmination of every step they had taken together. She had feared him, distrusted him, even questioned his intentions, but now she understood. Love had not been immediate. It had been forged through fire, tested by danger and strengthened by choice. As the firelight danced across the faces of the tribe, Taza stepped forward and spoke in his deep, measured tone. "Whitefire, you have come into my life not as a captive but as my equal. Today, before the spirits, before my people, I claim not your body but your heart. Will you walk beside me now and always?" Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the man who had been both fear and sanctuary, both teacher and protector. She saw the weight of his scars, the depth of his soul, and the unwavering truth in his gaze. She felt the pull of the desert, the pulse of the tribe, and the certainty that she had finally found her place. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the hush of the assembled camp. "Yes, Taza, I will walk beside you." A cheer rose from the tribe, children laughing and running, women singing, men beating drums in celebration. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. She had been sold into fear, carried across the desert, tested by spirits in battle, and now she stood free. Free not in escape, but in love, in choice, in belonging. Taza took her hand again, this time lifting it gently to his chest. "You are my heart," he said softly. "Not because I demanded it, but because you chose it." Clara leaned into him, letting the warmth of his body, the steadiness of his heart, and the certainty of their bond fill her completely. The desert around them stretched endless and wild, but here, in the circle of firelight and blessing, she was home. That night, as the stars blanketed the sky and the wind whispered through the canyons, Clara understood fully. Fear had brought her to Taza, but love, steadfast, chosen, and unbreakable, would keep her here forever. She had become the bride of the Desert King, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged.